One of them at all, except when he had a doctor's appointment. And he didn't call. And I was worried, and I called him. Why aren't you here? Why aren't you coming? So not only do we rely on him for so much, but he talks a lot. And he does. And so we always will pass on and on to the next person that needs to know a little bit more about something. And I had more people come up and say, I didn't understand that until Norman explained it. So right now, we got a little special gift for Norman that he's going to take him to go with his daughter and goes home. And then we're going to sing happy birthday for him. Okay? So Tom, would you start us with a happy birthday?
To you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Norman. Happy birthday to you.
And many more. Okay, Norman's going to educate us about Virginia Hall, and I think it's going to be a good one. I'm getting ahead of myself. But in the meantime, John Gross is going to lead us in a prayer.
Gentlemen, remove your caps, please, as we bow for this prayer. Lord, our Holy Father, our God, the Creator of everything that we see, everything that we know, everything that we see, we smell, we taste, we touch. Thank you for this day. Thank you for the food that's been provided. Thank you for the Braunstein Foundation for their benevolence. Thank you for all who've given their lives, those who've sacrificed very much, those who support those in the field. We give great thanks for this organization and all those who are gathered here today. And we ask that we would be your servants in any way that you ask. Amen. Let's please stand. We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Tom Wickers is going to lead us in the national anthem.
Please join me in singing with that. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed as the twilight's last gleaming through frost nights and bright stars, through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we won. We're so gallantly streaming, and the wise everywhere, the first in the air, take proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say as that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Now, with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Norman.
Hey,
Yeah, okay.
there's two up here.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to talk about Virginia Hall, and this has just been an incredible person. It's unbelievable the things she did. She was born in Baltimore in April of 1906. If you know, wealthy family, so she went to prep school, girls' prep school, and then when she went to college, she went to Radcliffe, she went to Barnard, she went to George Washington University, she went to Europe, studied in Paris, and she went to Vienna, Austria, she studied there. So, and she was a very tall woman, she was 5'8", for a woman that was born in 1906, that was a big woman for her era. She could speak English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, some Russian, and some Polish. She learned this. She was stationed in Warsaw, Poland, State Department one time, and that's where she picked up the Polish and Russian. From there, she was transferred to Turkey in 1933. It was in Turkey where she went bird hunting and tripped, fell, and shot herself in the leg with a shotgun and left her foot. And got infection in it. They didn't have a hospital nearby, and they had to amputate her foot, her leg below the knee. She did have a knee joint, and so she had this leg, and so she said, I'm going to have it forever, so I'm going to give her the name. So she told me, why she called it Cuthbert, but that's what she named the leg. And so the leg was, like one of the stories they said, the name of the book was Spy with the Wooden Leg. Well, it was an artificial leg, and the center part where the calf is was wood, and it's shaped like a leg. I mean, it wasn't a big leg beat apart, it wasn't a thing like that. So she went back to the States for the artificial leg, where she could walk on it, and she went back, and she went to Italy in 1934 for a while with the State Department. And then she went to Estonia, and she was there, and while she was there, it got to be 1939, and she resigned because she could tell the war was coming on. And so she went to France. She got to France, and she asked them if she could help in any way. So they said, well, can you drive an ambulance? Well, she said, sure, I drive an ambulance. They had an apartment in town in Baltimore, and they lived on the farm in the summertime. So she drove a truck and tractor and everything so she could drive an ambulance. And that was a pretty dangerous job because it was, the war, Germany and France was only lasting about 6 weeks, I think. And so she made it through that. It was a dangerous job. And these are all pictures of Virginia Hall. And you can see you can tell she's a fairly good-sized woman just even looking at a picture of her. She was quite recent. So the French surrendered in June of 1940. So when they surrendered, why the Germans took France into this is Europe. And after June of 1940, when they took over from Germans control of France, they controlled everything in Europe. These were neutral countries, this was a neutral country, this was a neutral country. So all there was what the Germans controlled and Britain. That was all there was. It was just the British. There wasn't anybody else. So that was the way the war was going on at that time. So very dangerous to go there. And so she was there, and then so they ended up with the well, you showed that map, I guess, right? So this is France. So you got Paris here. This was all they called the northern zone. It was controlled by the Germans. This is the southern zone, which this is called the free zone. They called it the unoccupied zone. And so the Vichy government, there was a little town named Vichy, but when I talk about it, I'll be talking about Vichy. I'm talking about this whole area. And so Vichy was in control of this, but the Germans told them what to do. So they more or less they weren't actually in charge of it, but they thought they wouldn't have to put an army down there if they could have Vichy France, which was General Philippe Pétain from World War I was in charge of it. And so that was their idea, I guess, the Germans, so they didn't have to do it. But after they surrendered, why, she was an American, so we weren't in the war yet, so she could get a visa and she could get out of France and go to England. But Germany took charge of this. To get out, she was in Paris. To get out, you had to go Spain and over here to Portugal and then cross to get back to Europe. You couldn't go from France to England. You had to go a roundabout way to get there. So she did, and while she was in the railroad station down there in Spain, she was talking about being in the ambulance service, and a British agent, which every country had agents in Spain at the time, talked to her and said, I'll give you this phone number. You got a job? She said, no. So talk to these people, then we have a job for you. And so she said, okay. So she stuck in her pocket. She got to London, and she got a job with the American Embassy as a clerk. And then after a while, she called this number, and when she called in, it turned out to be a spy unit. And so when she got there to England, she talked to them, and they were interested in her because she could speak German, she could speak French, and so she could speak Italian, and she could speak all the languages. So they wanted her, even though she had this artificial leg, which I'll get to you in a little bit, and she had this leg, but they still wanted her because there was very few people that had her knowledge of the country like she did. She traveled all over Europe. So in July of 1940, Winston Churchill got this idea of getting this special branch. It was he wanted to do it. It's called Special Operations Executive. That's what they called it. Now after that, they just used initials. They were just SOE. So anytime I talk about SOE, well, that's what it is. And Churchill created this in July 1940, right after France fell, and they were supposed to go in and get information and also do sabotage. That was really the main function of sabotage. They were going to, tear things up, and anything they could destroy belonged to the Germans. That was their job, because they didn't have a lot of equipment at the time. And so they had this organization, but nobody in the organization knew anything about spying or anything. They had no military experience, because the MI5 and MI6, which were the British spy organizations, they wouldn't help them because they said there was just a bunch of amateurs, they were just useless, and they wouldn't help them. So they just went on their own, and they made a lot of mistakes and got a lot of people killed. But they made it through. So eventually she went through the training, and Virginia was the first woman sent by the SOE to occupy Vichy, which is, she was in this area here. And see, Vichy is right in here, and most of the work she did is here at Lyon. That's where she did most of her work. And she was the first woman that they sent over there. And so it was really a big deal for them, to get somebody with her experience to be there. And she was just supposed to be a liaison officer, was trying to get supplies for them, but she was the kind of person that she just took charge of things. She just went there, and she wasn't just going to be a helper. She took charge. She became the head of the resistance, and she just took charge of everything. She was a take charge of girls, she was. And so she would to get supplies from the British. They would fly them over and drop them out of planes, and they had got so good at it that they would set a row of torches up, and so they had the coordinates the plane would, and they could see these, and they would drop them out in parachutes. They could pick up the bundles, get the equipment out of the bundles, bury it, they'd have a trench dug, they'd bury the bundle, put the fires out, load it on carts, and be gone in 15 minutes. I mean, plain no more, it hadn't hardly got away and they were already gone. That's how quick they really got it organized. They were really great about doing that. So, but the way she got to France, France was, she's in England over here, so she went to Lisbon. So what they did, they said, well, why, America wasn't in the war yet. This is 1940, so we weren't in the war yet. So what she did, she sent they got the New York Post newspaper and gave her a job as a reporter. So she came to Lisbon, to Spain, up into this map called the Free Zone, and that way she could travel around all over the country, because she was a reporter for a newspaper. So that gave her a lot of leeway. She could hunt up drop zones and everything, and she got in contact with the government, with the resistance. And so she was working as a resistance, and she was also writing articles for the New York Post. So she thing was legitimate because the United States wasn't in war yet. So that was what she did. She was the leader. And so at the time now, she wasn't, they had what they called wireless telegraph, which was a thing about the size of this, weighed about 40 pounds, and it was dot dash stuff, and that's the way they sent the messages from France to London. And so, but she wasn't a wireless operator. And so that was the problem they had. They couldn't find enough wireless operators to get around. And anybody that went over and went into that in 1940 or 41, when she was really brave, courageous person to go in there, in France, completely occupied. But the bravest of all was the wireless operators. They were the bravest of all. They only lasted 6 weeks before they were caught by the Germans. Anytime they turned the radio on to send a message, the Germans could pick it up. They could pick up the sound of it. And so they would track it, and as they got closer, it got stronger. If they took off this way and it was weaker, but they knew they went the wrong way, so they would turn around. And if they sent messages several times in the same area, they would get like 3 vehicles, and they would triangulate, and they could go right to the building you were in. So 6 weeks is all longer wireless operators usually lasted. Then they were captured. But that was really the dangerous job. So, the United States still was in the Army because this was early in 41, so they weren't in the war yet. So we didn't get into war. And so the U.S. still had an embassy in Vichy, this area down here, because the Germans controlled this, but this wasn't controlled by the Germans, so we still had an embassy there. Even though we weren't in the war yet, we had an embassy. Even after we got into the war, we still had an embassy in Vichy until the Germans took over. So she went there as a newspaper reporter, and she started working with the resistance. And so she worked there, and she had 2 special colleagues. Was a guy named Dr. Jean Moreau and Morset, and he was a medical doctor, and there was the other one was Janine Guerin. She was a madam of a problem. So she was a handy gal to have around. So she would hide. The place she had was, the first floor was like the dining area, and get acquainted and this type thing, with the women and this all this stuff. The second floor was the bedrooms. The third floor was empty, so they hid people that they were trying to get out of France, like a downed pilot or something. They hid them up in the third floor of this property. That's the way they did. So you get the Vichy officials, the high officials, that went to this place, so they had food set in, the best of food, the best of wine and everything, for they would party. Well, you know how men are. If you give them a good meal, give them a lot of wine, have a woman, they'll tell you anything. Men are easy, ladies. Men are easy. All you got to do is get them wound up and they'll tell you anything. So they found out a lot of information. And it was surprising, all the stuff they found out. They would just start conversation casually, and they would start telling them what their job was, what they did, and what unit they belonged to, and so they were picking up tons of information. So that was going pretty good, and then on October the 10th of 1941, 12 of these SOE agents decided they were going to get together and just have a discussion about what they should do. And then they give them an opportunity to relax. They didn't have to be in the retention of being on guard all the time. And so they went to a chateau in southern France, but the Vichy had found out about them, and they were sitting there waiting for them, and they walked in. They captured all 12 of them. Now, Virginia didn't go to the meeting, so they didn't capture her. So there they've captured 12, and they didn't have very many agents in there in 1941, so they captured these 12, and so that was a big portion of the SOE agents that they had at the time. So they captured them and took them to a dungeon type prison, and there was no way they could get them out of this prison. So that was that's what they did, and they tortured them and didn't feed them too well, and they thought maybe they could try to get them some other time. You know, they were trying to get them out of there because they had a lot of information, so they needed to get them out. So Virginia, she got the idea that she would go talk to the American ambassador, because we still had an ambassador in Vichy there. So she went and talked to him, and he did kind of back channel stuff. And the Vichy government didn't want to raise any ruckus with the United States at the time, so they said, okay, we'll move them to what they call an internment camp. And the internment camp were like this. They were wooden barracks. If you saw The Great Escape, the movie, they lived in wooden barracks like this. This was the type of camp they went to. And it happened to be a place called Barzat, and that's where they went. So she talked to him, and they did some back channel work with the ambassador, and they got him transferred there. So while they were there, the 12 of them, why they treated them a little better. Now the 12, part of them was British and part of them were French. So one of them, his wife, was one of the Frenchmen, came to visit, and they would let her bring stuff in to the prisoners, and so they brought smuggled a file in. And so they had it, and so one of the things they sent them to eat was sardines. And you know, their little can like this. They folded the sardine can up, flattened it out, and made it almost hard as a piece of steel. They had seen the key to the lock, and so they started making keys. And it took about 4 or 5 keys. They finally got to where they got a key that would unlock the door. So there's the 12 of them. They still kept them together. Now, they hadn't mistreated them very much. They were treated fairly well in this internment camp. It was more like a prisoner of war camp or something. It wasn't near as bad as a concentration camp. So they were in pretty good shape. So they had to get them out, because just any time the Germans could just walk in and take them off the German. So they had to get them out, and they were about to be July of 42, and they looked for a week that had the dark of the moon. They had to get out in the dark of the moon, where the guards couldn't see them. So they unlocked the door, slipped out, laid down flat in the shadows, because it was dark of the moon. When the guard got past, they ran over to the fence. They had a piece of carpet, barbed wire on the top. They put the carpet on the top. They climbed up, both things, took the carpet, laid down on the outside, they had to get out in 12 minutes because the guard would be around again. So they got them all out. So Virginia had set up a place a mile down the road. There was a truck waiting for them. So they went down, they got on this truck, and they took them about 30, 40 miles away to an abandoned farm. So they didn't have to, they didn't have to hide out. They were out there. She had everything that they needed at the farm. They were prepared for them. So they got them out, and then when they got them out of there, so Virginia had the French who start telling kind of letting it slip. They'd say something and the Germans maybe overhear them. And what they were doing, they were telling them that a plane had came and picked these 12 men up. And they were still out there at that farm. They had left the country or nothing. So she got paperwork and everything, and she did get them all out of the country. Of course, they couldn't come back because the Germans had their photographs or fingerprints, any scars or tattoos they had. They had a perfect description of it. So they had to, they got them back to England, but they never came back again. They were having troubles. The big troubles they were having there was they didn't have enough wireless. They couldn't send messages back. So at one time, Virginia would maybe pedal on a bicycle for 30 miles or 40 or something to where there was a wireless operator to send a message back. And so then she got to where she didn't even have that. So she went to the American Embassy again. So she put the information that she had collected in the embassy pouch. And they shipped it to Switzerland and then to London, but it took several days because she didn't have a wireless operator. So that was the way she had to get the information out. And at the time, she was really the only one that was able to supply information from Vichy and the German occupiers and the future of the Allied intelligence. And France was pretty well rested on one solitary woman, which was Virginia Hall. And so after all the work that Virginia did with the resistance, they started calling she went to Lyon, France and worked, and she started calling the Marie of Lyon. That was actually one of her code names. And so the Germans at the time, they knew there was a spy there, and they knew it was somebody new because the resistance was more active than it had been. But they had no idea who it was. And so the mentality of the 1940s, it couldn't possibly be a woman. Couldn't be a woman. Couldn't be a woman in 1940. Woman couldn't do such things as be a spy. Well, eventually they got enough information that they found out it was a woman. So they were looking for this woman, and she was sending pilots and British agents back to France, coming back to England, and so they just couldn't believe that it was a woman. They finally found out that it was a woman, and so at one time they were looking for 4 different women, and all those 4 was her. She was all of them. She was all 4 of them they were looking for. And she told people that wanted to join the resistance, I'll read it off to you. She didn't care who or what people were, what party or religion they were. If they wanted to help and wanted to join the group, she would give them supplies and whatever they needed. And that's what she did. So she actually became the leader. And the Vichy police, which they were supposed to be pro-German, but some of them were with the resistance, and so they would let them know if they were going to be a raid or something. They would let them know because the Vichy police had some good guys and some bad guys in it, so they would let them know what was going on. But since no one had a contact or communications or routes or resolve, what Virginia did. He was warned several times to leave France, but she wouldn't go. You could say that about half of the early operations of the OSE could not have been carried out without Virginia Hall. She was the leader of it. At one time, the Germans were looking for 4 different agents, and they all was Virginia, as I told you. They said she was the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her. They were going to find her, torture her, and kill her. What they were going to do to her. So she finally got contacted. Finally got a wireless operator, and she got contact with London. So that worked out a lot better for her. The Vichy then was looking for what they called the limping lady, because she had lost her leg, and so they called her the limping lady. And so they thought they could find her, and how she survived all these years, all this time there, I do not know. She had a limp, naturally, and French was very good, but she had an accent. I don't know if it was a southern drawl from Baltimore or what, but she didn't have the French language had. And so the French knew she wasn't French. Maybe she could speak the language, but they knew she wasn't French. But the Germans didn't know. But she was never, all the time she was there, she never was close to being captured. She was very smart. She always moved around a lot. And so she was the head of the resistance in Lyon. She was supposed to just be over there getting them supplies, but she just took over command of the whole thing. That's the way she was. So now we're entering Robert Elish. Abbé Robert Elish. Abbé is a priest. This man was an ordained priest. He wasn't pretending to be a priest, he was a priest. He was a German double agent. The French thought he was working for them, but really he was working for the Germans. And he really was a priest. He came to see Dr. Rousset, and he believed him. He had the password, and everybody had heard of him. He was well known as a priest. And so they got him cahoots with him, and he wanted to see Virginia, and Virginia didn't like him. She didn't think he was trustworthy. So one time she did go see him, but that's the only time she went to see him. She didn't like him. But the doctor believed him because he was a priest. You know, priest wouldn't be lying. Well, he said, he did. So basically, before he went to Lyon, he lived in Paris, and he lived in one of the big hotels, had a big apartment with all types of artwork in there, and two mistresses lived with him. So he liked the ladies. He was a priest, but he liked the ladies. So Robert Elish is his name. So he was a double agent. He was an ordained priest, like I said, and he convinced them all. He was getting paid by the Germans, and he was getting money from the French to help make resistance units, which there wasn't. He was just getting money. He was getting 25,000 marks a month from the Germans for his work, and you don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars he got from the French. So he was making a killing, as a double agent. And so he wanted, like I said, he wanted to meet Virginia, but she didn't want to. So in September of 1942, she decided that she needed to get out of the country. Well, Elish didn't have a photograph of her, but he went to the Germans and got an artist, and they drew a picture of her, and they posted it everywhere, all over France, and with a big reward for her. And so she had to leave the country. She didn't have any choice. I mean, she couldn't walk down the street, and the people would recognize her, and the people that were supposed to be your friends would turn you in. That's how bad it was. And so she started hiding out in September, and then in October of 42, where did she go hide out? Upstairs, the brother. That's where she hid out. Which were a lot of other people that did there. She hid out there. And the only way to get out of France at that time, she tried to get a visa as a newspaper reporter to get out, but she couldn't get that. So the only way to get out was go south in France all the way to the Spanish border. Only one problem when you get there, the Pyrenees Mountains are there. It's mid-November. It's cold. It's zero. It's 8,000 feet high. Took 3 days to get over the mountains. So she had she was in terrible fix. And so she got over the mountains. But what's strange about it, I don't know if this is significant or not. I didn't find anything to prove it. But the November the 11th, 1942, the Germans came, this is in the East, they came and took over the Vichy government. They just kicked them out and took over control of all of France. That's the same day she left to get on the train. Now, I don't know if November the 11th was a significant date to the Germans, because that's the date World War I was over. So I don't know if that was significant or not, but it seems strange to me that it turns out that way. So she goes to Spain. And when she got there, she got caught, because she didn't have any papers. So they caught and they put her in prison. Oh, when she went over the mountains, they was 2 British and 1 Belgian men and her went over the mountain with the guy. The guy didn't want to take Virginia over the mountain because she was a woman. Didn't think she could make the trip. She never told him she had a wooden leg. He didn't know they had a wooden leg. He got over the mountain with a stupid wooden leg, weight 9 pounds. She went over the mountains with that thing on. So she got to Spain, and when she got to Spain, they got captured. They sent the men to one prison, sent her to another. She didn't have papers, so the prison was a prison for prostitutes. Any woman that didn't have papers, they assumed she was a prostitute. So she went to the prostitute prison. And she was in there. They didn't treat her, she was treated okay. And so one of the women was getting out, and she had them to send a message to Barcelona, to the American embassy in Spain, and they came down and got her out, because she was an American. So they got her out, and she was in prison about, 18 days, 2 weeks, depending which report you read. That's a little, how they are. They're a little fuzzy on that. So that was, so she was in France from September of 41 to November of 42. She was the only agent that stayed in France more than a year. She was there 14 months. So nobody else, usually an agent came and they were there just 3 or 4 weeks or something, and the Germans was kind of catching on to them, so they would leave. And she was the only one that stayed there. She was there 14 months. And that's remarkable in itself. So yeah, she got out of prison, and by the time she got out, it was late November when she went in, so it was probably in December sometime she got out. Before she got all the paperwork and got an extra visa. She was January before she got a 43, before she got back to England, when she actually got back to England. Well, they didn't. The English thought she did great work. They loved her, but they couldn't send her back because all the Germans knew what she looked like. So she couldn't go back. So she got the brainstorm. She had a spell there where they took 2 or 3 weeks or months to debrief her and everything. And so she said, well, I'm not doing anything. Why don't I learn to be a wireless operator? So she did. So they wouldn't send her back. So in 1942, who shows up? It's the Americans. They show up. So the Americans want an outfit like SOE. So what is their outfit? The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. Most of you, a lot of people, you've probably heard of the OSS. So she went to them. They said, yeah, we'll take it. So they disguised her. Now she's a wireless operator too. They disguised her as an old woman dyed her hair gray, with wrinkles on her face. They even ground her teeth down to make her look old. Sounds yucky to me. And so they sent her back over there as a milkmaid, they called her. She took care of the cattle, milked them, made the butter, the cheese. That was what she did. So she went back and she did that. Well, she would take the cattle out of the pasture, and while she was doing that, then she would look for drop zones. They called them receptions. I don't know why, but they were drop zones where they were going to drop supplies. So that's what she did. She was what they call a milkmaid. And this is the wireless that she had. Now, the first wireless that they had at the beginning of the war weighed 40 pounds. That was heavy to lug around. This one weighed 20 pounds. But the problem with them, it wasn't that you couldn't send the message. The problem was, how long was battery life in 1940? It was very short, so even though you had a machine, didn't necessarily mean you could send the message out because you didn't have any power source. So that was the big bugaboo they had of the wireless. So then then she went to France, where I showed you where Lyon was on the map. Well, she was about 100 miles away from there. It wasn't only 100 miles from where she was there when she worked for the British, so it was almost the same place. So she was there, and she went into the mountains. They called them the Loire Mountains, or the Loire River. And so she worked in the mountains. So eventually, when she got into the mountains with the Americans, she was one of the few agents that switched from SOE, which was the British unit, to the OSS, which was the American unit. Probably nobody else did, because nobody else was an American. Nobody worked for the British had been an American. So here she goes. So finally she goes up into the mountains, and she goes up into the mountains. Then she gets rid of her old woman garb, and she's wearing sort of a uniform type thing. Yeah, there. This one over here, this is Virginia. This is her right here. These are the people that she worked the closest with, is these people right here. And she went into the mountains, and then she started wearing this military type uniform. So she had returned to France in March of 1944, when she started doing the milkmaid stuff. And so she traveled there, and from the time she left, when she worked for the British, till she got back with the Americans, it was 16 months. And the Germans were still looking for her all that time. For 16 months they were looking for the woman. And she wasn't even in the country, but they were still looking for her. They were looking all over the place for her. They couldn't figure out where she was. Well, of course, they couldn't catch her. She was in London. Didn't have that long born. So she started working in the mountains, and then she got these resistance troops, and she tried to organize them, and she split them up in groups of 25, because you don't want 100 men to try to do sabotage. That's too many people. You're going to get caught. You can't have that. So they did like groups of 25, and they went out and just sabotage. We just go out, hit and run, go up the trains. There's always some trains here, Di. This is the type of stuff they were doing. The resistance was doing this stuff. But you didn't want 100 men. You didn't have an army. She told them, said, you cannot stand up and fight with the German army head on. They will kill you. You're not trained soldiers. You can't fight the German army. So they didn't. So they did all this sabotage work. That was the thing they were doing. So all this time they were looking for her. She was up there in the mountains. So in 1944, she started wearing the uniform. And so D-Day was June the 6th, 1944, when the Allies landed. Well, the Allies landed at Normandy Hill. So they were on the English Channel. Lyon is way in the southern district, not close. The original plan was for D-Day was They were going to enter Normandy, but they were going to have a force enter from the Mediterranean into southern France, but they couldn't get it coordinated, so they didn't do it. So they did D-Day. But the troops for D-Day wasn't any help in the southern part of France because they wanted to go north into Germany. They wasn't interested in southern France, so they were going north into Germany. So that was, the Germans weren't, they wasn't getting any help down there. So that's what they did. They turned and went north, and it took them the Allies 6 weeks to make it to Paris. They didn't even want to go to Paris, but Charles de Gaulle, the French, wanted them to take Paris. They had a general that had everything of any importance in Paris was explosives, and all they had to do was set it off, and they would practically destroy the whole city. But he finally said, I'm not going to be the guy that destroys Paris, and so he didn't do it. This German general, otherwise, all the landmarks, they would be gone. That had been for him. So he was really, he was a nice fellow. Well, as a German, he was a nice guy. At least he saved Paris. I'll give him credit for that. So one of the many things she did at the time was she coordinated with a lot of the former French officers, and she made them into these units, these guerrilla forces, split them up, and they would they shoot, burn, destroy, and leave. You don't set a charge up with, say, a timer on it and stay and watch it blow up. When you hook it up, you leave. You don't want to be there. They might capture you, so you left. So the Americans wanted her to liberate 2 towns in southern France. The first one was called La Chambeau. This is a real small town. The importance of La Chambeau was that they were smuggling Jews out of the country in La Chambeau. It was a Protestant city in a Catholic area, and they would smuggle the Jews out of there, and they would hide them and would help them escape, and they escaped the Nazi genocide. And so they saved a lot of people there at this place. They had little children, and somebody that had worked with Vichy would let them know if they were coming to town, the Germans. They would take the children out in the woods, like on a picnic for the day or something, and they would teach the children how to be Catholics and how to be Protestants. They were Jewish children. So if they talked to them, why they didn't know they were Jewish. And so that's what they did. So all the Germans had there was a convalescent hospital. That's really all they had. So they didn't have a lot of garrison troops there. So it wasn't difficult. They just more or less went into the town and they just took over. It wasn't a complicated affair. But then the other town was a place called Le Prix, and it was another town. Now, it was a little bigger town, and the Germans had several thousand troops there. The town was surrounded by mountains and forests, the whole town. So she took the resistance there. Now she wasn't using these groups of 25. She had a bigger group. She surrounded the whole town, did all this sabotage work. They couldn't get anything into the town. They couldn't get anything out. They were trapped in the town. There was several thousand of the Germans in this town. They just left them stranded in there. So the Germans decided they were going to blow up a bunch of trucks and take them out in trucks. Well, they knew the only communication they had was the wireless, and the French could read their messages. So they knew if they were going to do something in an area, they would take men from here and put a whole bunch in one spot where the Germans were going to be. So they decided they let the trucks come out of the town, and they blew up the road in front of them and back of them. And the Americans had dropped them supplies, and one of the supplies they dropped them was bazookas. And they shot like the first truck and the last truck, and all the rest of them were captured, and they had a battle, and they killed like 100 Germans, and then the rest of them surrendered eventually. And so the town eventually surrendered because they couldn't get food in, they couldn't get anything. They couldn't get any help from outside from the Germans because they were all moving up with the Allies when D-Day was coming in. So that's what they had to do. So after the war, several years after the war, Israel stated that the village of Washambo saved 3,000 to 5,000 Jews, and calling them the righteous among nations. This was the award they give them because they saved all these people for it. Now, Virginia returned to France in September of 1944. Her firework was basically done, and after she captured the city there, when she had like more or less like a whole army, she captured the city. They invaded. The Allies invaded from the Mediterranean finally. The Free French were supposed to be the ones that was taking charge of it, but guess when they got there, guess who went ashore first? It was the Americans. The French followed them, so they did all the more dirty work. So I'm not too sold on the French. They weren't much help. So she went back to back to England. And so the OS was planning to sabotage the group to go to Austria. And who could speak German? Virginia. She could speak German, so they were going to send her. She was going to be one of the leaders of this group. And it was going to be a group, a sabotage group, like 25 or something. They got it all organized, and they were ready to go. And by that time, the Allies had got far enough to Austria that they didn't ever need to go. So she didn't go. She didn't take part in the group. They didn't go. So Robert Leash, the priest, after the war, he turned himself into the Americans. He tried to get better treatment for them. So they told him, he told them he worked for the resistance, which was a lie in the first place. So the Americans turned him over to the French. They had a trial for it, and they found him guilty, and they killed him by firing squad in February of 1949. So they killed him. And Virginia returned to the United States in September of 1945. So she was still over there for quite a while, and she looked like an old woman. She was wore out for her age, and the wars had taken a toll on her. She was 39 years old. She wasn't what you'd call a real old woman, but she was really old. So as soon as the war was over, the Americans broke up the OSS. They didn't need it anymore. So the Americans awarded Virginia the Distinguished Service Cross. Now, if you're a sailor, that's the Navy Cross, or the Marine, that's the Navy Cross, which is the second highest medal that the United States gives. The only thing higher is the Medal of Honor. That's how high this medal was that she received. Now, President Truman was going to present it to her, but she didn't want that. She didn't like the publicity and stuff, but she was going to be a spy again. So she didn't want it. So this is General Donovan, that's awarding her this medal. And that's the medal that she received, which was the Distinguished Service Cross for her service in France when she was 6 months in France and she organized these troops, and there was those troops that she organized. There was I'll tell you about it. Here's the citation. I'll read it to you. This is what for her Distinguished Service Cross. The President of the United States authorization of the Act of Congress on July 8, 1918, that's when they started the medal, takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Service Cross to Miss Virginia Hall, an American civilian, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy while serving as an American civilian intelligence officer in the employ of the Special Operations Service. She entered voluntarily and served in enemy-occupied France from March to September of 1944, despite the fact that she was well known to the Gestapo because of previous activities. Ms. Hall established and maintained radio communications with London's headquarters, supplied valuable operational and intelligence information. With the help of her group, she organized the armed and trained three battalions, which I think it was about 1,500 men she was in charge of. And so she worked in the Department of the Loire region, infested with enemy troops, continuously at the risk of capture, torture, and death. She directed the resistance forces with extraordinary success in acts of sabotage and guerrilla warfare against enemy troops, installations, and communications. Ms. Hall displayed rare courage, perseverance, and gentility, and her efforts contributed materially to the successful operation of resistance forces in support of the Allied expeditionary forces in France. So that's what she got the medal for. So in October of 1945, they disbanded the OSS. It was a war organization, so they didn't name it. Harry Truman in 1947 signed the National Security Act in September of 1947, which established the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. That's what she did. That's what they did. And she became a contact and intelligence officer in Italy until she left the CIA for a while. And then she was working for Radio Free Europe, but that was technically the CIA too. They were the head behind the Radio Free Europe that they broadcasted. In 1951, she returned to the CIA as one of the first women they had, and she became the first woman operative to have an entire covert action arm in the CIA. In 1950, she worked with the Southern European desk and the primary apparel media desk for Western Europe, and the Western Hemisphere desk, which covered South America from Cuba to Argentina. Now, a desk with the CIA sounds like it's just somebody has a desk, but that might be a couple hundred people, each one of those. There's a lot of people involved in it. In 1966, she was forced to retire because she reached the age of 60. So, in June of 1988, her name was added to the Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame. That's ours. In December 2006, the 100th anniversary of her birth, they had a celebration at the French ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C., where the French honored her as an American friend of France and a true hero of the resistance. At the same ceremony, she was given a certificate for the member of the British Empire, where we went to, which is this medal. But they awarded it to her, but she left England, so they never did give it to her. She was awarded it, but they didn't give it to her. And so 60 years later, they found it, and they brought it to this ceremony and gave it to her niece because she didn't have any children. So they gave it to her niece, and so the British, the French gave her this crow de guerre with palms. With palms means that for combat is what the palms meant. And also the Americans unveiled a painting by a guy named Jeff Bass. And this is the painting. This is her operating in 1942 in France with her wireless. And this guy, you can see how he's powering it. He's pedaling a bicycle frame to a generator like a car, and it powered the thing. So she had power. And this is a famous painting. Now this painting, the original of this painting, is in the CIA headquarters today. And so the French gave her the code. They couldn't find it. The problem was they gave her the thing in 1946 and she never received it. And the French Records Bureau burned down in 1975. So she got it, but she never received it, as you could say. And so in the current catalog of this, the CIA has a museum. Nobody knows that. But you can't go there. It's only open 2 days a week, and you have to get special permission to go. You can't just go there and say, I want to see your museum. No, you've got to get special permission to go. So there's one section in the museum that there's just 5 people in this section. 4 of them are past directors of the CIA. The other one is Virginia Hall. That's what they thought. In December of 2016, they built a new building. They named it in honor of Virginia Hall. She didn't seek publicity for her wartime exploits. In the years past, historians sought her out to learn more about her extraordinary story. So the thing was, well, first she signed the Official Security Acts with the British, where you would never, your whole life, ever tell what you did in the war. But she didn't want any publicity, so nobody knew anything about her. So any books written about her was written from at least 2010 up to today. There's no books. You can get a book with 1970 about Virginia Hall. There isn't any such thing. So she was just an extraordinary story. In 1957, she married a guy named Kohler. He had been with the OSS. He was French, and he had his family moved to New York, and then they decided to go back to France. The family did, but the boy said he wanted to stay in New York. So, of course, he was very fluent French because he was French. So they've been going together off and on, and so in 1957 they got married finally, and they had met in 1944. So naturally they didn't have any children because she was too old by then, and but she was. You got to remember, she was 5 feet 8 inches tall, and he was a little bitty guy. He was only like 6 inches shorter than her and 8 years younger. And so when she retired, from the CIA, by her and Paul, they bought a little farm in Barnesville, Virginia, and they lived there, and they raised goats and stuff and made cheese and, the stuff. And they raised her, paid grade in the CIA right before they left. They upped her grade, which gave her a little bigger pension. She died on July the 8th of 1982 at age 76 years of age. Virginia, to this day, is a legend in the Haute Plateau in France. So that's still, they remember her today. And a couple other things I want to tell you. They made a movie about Virginia Hall. She's about half of this movie. It was made in 2019. It's pretty new. They have it at the library. I think Amazon Prime, when they decided Prime, I think one of those services they had it. You can get a copy at the library, and it's about the part where she was with the British with the OSS. It ends there. It doesn't end when she goes back with the OSS. That's the movie. Now, the predominant book on Virginia Hall is A Woman of No Importance. And the studio, Paramount bought the movie rights to it. So next year, 24, they're supposed to make a movie of Virginia Hall. And Daisy Ridley is going to play Virginia. If you don't know who she is, if any of you've watched the newer Star Wars, the little warrior Rey, that's who it is. She's going to be Virginia Hall, and J.J. Abrams, which directed the last Star Wars movies, he's with it. And so it's going to be a big production. It's not just going to be some cheap independent movies they're going to make. And so that's what they're going to do. And okay, so give me my guy there. Yeah, this guy. I don't know if any of you have heard of Lost Barbie. No, I'm not playing. I will be. Lost Barbie. Have any of you heard of him? He was real famous. He was a Nazi, and when the Germans came in and took over France, and when they took over the southern part, he was the head of the Gestapo in Lyon at the time, and he's supposed to be instrumental in killing like 1,500 French. Now later reports said that when they started retreating and stuff, that they killed 10 or 15,000, and he was instrumental in all of that. So this guy right here. But what's the thing about it is, in the United States' great wisdom, they were afraid of communism after the war. Barbie had been hiding out in Germany. You know, he was a German officer. He was hiding out in Germany. 1949, the Americans approach him and hire him to help weed out communists in Germany. Lost Barbie, that killed all these hundreds of people. He's working for the CIA. So in 1951, things got too hot for Barbie, so the Americans arranged to send him to Bolivia. So he went to Bolivia, and he lived there, and he became a gun runner in Bolivia, and he worked with the government in Bolivia. They had a dictator. They had dictators, and he was good at getting information from prisoners, because that's what he did when he was in Leon. So he was good at that. So in 1970, the French found out where he was. The dictators in Bolivia, they protected him. French couldn't take him out. So finally, they got around to 1980s. They got a democratic government in Bolivia, so they turned him over to the French. Now, in 1946, he was tried in absentia to death for his war crimes. But by the time they got him back to France in 1987, France had did away with capital punishment in 1980. So they tried him, found him guilty, put him in prison, and he had cancer, and he died 4 years later. But he lived in Bolivia for 36 years free. This guy did. The Americans had to apologize to the French for protecting him all these years. Why we ever protected a guy like that, I just don't understand it. So basically, that's it.
Yeah. The wireless operators they ultimately executed,
Some of them were, some of them wasn't. Some of them, they didn't talk and they found out they weren't getting any information from them, so they just told one of the characters in this book was called The Spy, in the movie it's called The Spy that they made. There was a woman in there and she wouldn't talk, and finally they took her to Dachau prison camp in Germany and they shot her in the head. They just killed her. Yeah, a lot of them were killed. They sent, I think, 39 women and 13 of them were killed. So you was about a third of them, all of them that went like that, they were killed.
well, thank you, Norm, very much for